At my 65th birthday party, my husband raised his glass, smiled at our friends, and announced that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with a younger woman. For 1 second, I thought I had misheard him. The dining room at Harbor House in Charleston went so quiet I could hear the soft clink of ice settling in someone's water glass. There were white roses on every table, a vanilla buttercream cake waiting near the window, and a small silver 65 candle that my daughter-in-law Claire had insisted would look classy in photos. I was wearing the navy dress Richard once said made me look elegant, back when he still looked at me long enough to notice. Across from me, my son Evan lowered his eyes. Claire pressed her lips together, not with shock, but with the careful effort of a woman trying not to smile. Richard kept standing there, one hand around his champagne flute, his gray hair combed neatly back, his voice warm and practiced, as if he were giving a retirement speech instead of cutting me open in front of people who had eaten Thanksgiving dinner in my home for 30 years. "Margaret has been a good wife," he said, and somehow that hurt almost more than the first sentence, because he said good the way people describe an old couch they are ready to move to the garage. But I've realized I still deserve to feel alive. I deserve a fresh start. No one interrupted him. Not our neighbors. Not his golf friends. Not my own son. I looked at the cake, at the little sugar pearls around the edge, and remembered paying the deposit for this room myself because Richard had said birthdays were your kind of thing. Then I looked back at him and asked the only question that mattered. "Is she here tonight, Richard?" His smile twitched. That was the first crack. 3 tables behind me, a chair scraped softly against the floor. I did not turn right away. I gave myself one breath, then another. When I finally looked over my shoulder, Lauren Pierce was standing in a wine-colored dress, her blonde hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her face arranged into something that wanted to be sympathy. I recognized the bracelet on her wrist before I recognized her expression. Richard had told me that bracelet was a client gift, something he had picked up at a boutique on King Street, because business is still business, Maggie. I stared at it for a moment, then at him. 41 years of marriage can pass through a woman's mind faster than a match burning down. The late mortgage payments I covered from my teaching salary. The summer, I kept his company office running while he recovered from back surgery. The Christmases, I wrapped every gift and let him sign the cards. The nights I stayed quiet so Evan could have a peaceful home. All of it sat between us now, invisible to everyone but me. Richard cleared his throat, uncomfortable at last. "I didn't want to embarrass you," he said. I placed my water glass down carefully because my hand had started to shake, and I would not give him that satisfaction. Then I looked around that beautiful room, at all those familiar faces waiting to see whether I would break. Did everyone here know before I did? I asked. No one answered. And in that silence, I understood the evening perfectly. Earlier that afternoon, before the room turned cold and every familiar face became a stranger, I had stood in front of my bedroom mirror trying to decide whether the navy dress was too much. At 65, a woman learns to ask that question quietly. Too bright, too fitted, too hopeful. Then I remembered Richard standing behind me years ago, fastening the tiny pearl button at the back of my neck and saying, "That color makes your eyes look young, Maggie." So I wore it. Not because I wanted to look young, because I wanted to feel remembered. The house had been still that afternoon, the kind of stillness that settles after children grow up and husbands begin spending more time outside the rooms they once shared with you. Sunlight came through the white kitchen curtains and landed across the counter where I had lined up small thank you cards for the guests. I wrote each name carefully. Helen and George, Martin and Elise, Evan and Claire, Richard. I even wrote Lauren Pierce on one card because Richard had said she was helping him with a consulting project and had been so useful these past few months. I remember pausing over her name. The pen hovered above the paper. There was nothing wrong with inviting a business acquaintance to a birthday dinner, I told myself. Nothing wrong with being gracious. A woman can talk herself into peace when peace is the only thing she is trying to keep. I had ordered the cake from a bakery on Meeting Street, vanilla with buttercream roses, the same flavor Evan loved as a boy. I chose white flowers because they looked clean and calm. I called the restaurant twice to make sure the table would be near the windows, where the evening light touched the water. I wanted Richard to enjoy himself. That was the ridiculous part. Even after months of cold conversations, late arrivals, and the strange way he had started standing just outside my reach, I still wanted the night to soften him. I thought maybe if the candles were pretty enough, if the food was good enough, if I smiled at the right moments, he might remember us. Not the version of us with separate calendars and polite silences, but the real us. The young couple who once ate canned soup on the floor of our first apartment because we could not afford a dining table. The parents who stayed up until 2 in the morning building Evan a wooden train set for Christmas. The husband and wife who promised, during one hurricane season, that whatever happened outside, inside we would always be on the same side. By 5 o'clock, I had sprayed on the lavender perfume he used to like, slipped my feet into low silver shoes, and put on my mother's pearl earrings. When Richard came downstairs, he looked at his watch before he looked at me. "Ready?" he asked. Just that. One word, flat as a closed door. I smiled anyway. In the car, he said almost nothing. He kept both hands on the steering wheel, though traffic was light, and the radio played old country songs low enough to be ignored. I watched Charleston pass by through the window, the pastel houses, the gas lanterns, the oak branches bending over the streets like old women keeping secrets. I told myself not to expect too much. A pleasant dinner would be enough. A kind toast would be enough. His hand over mine for one quiet second would be enough. That is how little I was asking for by then. Not romance, not admiration, just some small public proof that 41 years had not been reduced to habit. When we arrived at Harbor House, Claire was already in the lobby with Evan beside her. She kissed my cheek and told me I looked nice, stretching the word just enough to make it feel like an evaluation. Evan hugged me too quickly, his eyes moving past my shoulder toward his father. I should have noticed then. I should have noticed the way they all seemed to be waiting for something. But hope can make a woman generous with explanations. I thought they were nervous about the party, about the seating, about making the evening perfect. I did not know they were nervous because they had already chosen their places in a story where I was the last person to be told the ending. The first strange thing had started 6 months earlier, though I did not call it strange at the time. Richard began taking his phone with him everywhere, even to the garage when he checked the water heater, even to the back porch when he pretended to look at the azaleas. For 40 years, his phone had lived on the kitchen counter beside the mail bowl, buzzing under coupons and church bulletins. Suddenly, it was always face down, always in his pocket, always locked with a code I had never seen him use before. When I asked about it one Sunday morning, he laughed and said, "Everybody uses passwords now, Maggie. Do not make a mystery out of nothing." So I did not. That was my mistake. A woman who has spent a lifetime keeping a household peaceful becomes very skilled at swallowing the first question, then the second, then the third. After the phone came the shirts. Crisp, white ones from a men's store downtown, blue ones with tiny pearl buttons, a pale gray one that looked too young for a man who had complained about dress clothes for most of our marriage. He started going to the gym near Savannah Highway 3 mornings a week, though his doctor had been asking him to walk for years, and he had always claimed his knees were too stubborn for exercise. He bought new cologne, something sharp and expensive, and said the old bottle I had given him made him smell like a grandfather. I remember standing in our bathroom doorway, holding a laundry basket against my hip, while he adjusted his collar in the mirror like a man preparing to be admired. He did not see me watching. Or maybe he did, and I had already become part of the furniture. Claire noticed everything too. She would come by with Evan for Sunday dinner, sit at my kitchen island, and ask questions that sounded casual until you heard them twice. Was the house still in both names? Had Richard ever talked about downsizing? Did I know how expensive property taxes were getting near the water? She said these things while slicing lemon for iced tea, while admiring the cabinet hardware, while telling me I should not be burdened with such a big place at my age. At my age, those 3 words had become a soft little shovel in her hands, digging me out of my own life, one polite sentence at a time. Evan never joined those conversations. He would stare into his coffee, or check the grill, or take a call from work that always seemed to arrive when his wife got too close to the truth. Once, I caught him looking at me with something like pity, and it frightened me more than anger would have. Pity means a decision has already been made without you. Still, I explained it all away. Richard was aging and afraid of it. Claire was ambitious and did not know how sharp she sounded. Evan hated conflict, just like he had when he was a little boy hiding under the dining room table during thunderstorms. I told myself families go through seasons. Cold ones pass. Distance closes. People remember what matters. Then came the credit card statement with a charge from a jewelry boutique on King Street. $875. I asked Richard about it while folding towels in the laundry room, and he said it was a client gift. He said her name quickly. Lauren Pierce. Useful woman. Smart woman. Good with details. He looked away before the last towel was folded. That was when I first felt the small, hard knot form beneath my ribs. Not proof. Not yet. Just the beginning of understanding. At the restaurant, watching Lauren stand 3 tables behind me with that bracelet shining on her wrist, the knot finally opened into something clear and cold. Richard had not changed overnight. He had been leaving me in small pieces for months, and everyone closest to me had been stepping carefully around the trail. I looked at Lauren for a long moment, not because I wanted to study the woman Richard had chosen, but because I needed to understand the size of the insult. She was younger than me, yes, but not young enough to excuse the childishness of standing in another woman's birthday dinner wearing a bracelet bought with another woman's trust. Her dress was the color of dark red wine, tasteful and expensive, the kind of dress a person wears when she wants to look like she belongs in a room that did not invite her for the right reasons. Her face had gone pale under the soft restaurant lights, but she did not sit back down. She looked at Richard first, waiting for him to protect her, and that told me more than any confession could have. He had promised her a version of himself that probably sounded generous, trapped, misunderstood. Men who want sympathy often rewrite their marriages before they leave them. I imagined what he must have told her. That I was cold. That I had stopped caring. That we had lived like strangers for years. That he had given me everything, and now he only wanted one small chance to be happy. It is astonishing how easily a lifetime of labor can be edited out of a story when the person telling it wants applause. Lauren stepped forward, one hand lightly touching the bracelet, as if she had only just remembered she was wearing evidence. "Margaret," she said softly, "I never meant to hurt you." Her voice was gentle, almost rehearsed. It was the voice people use when they want forgiveness before they have earned honesty. I turned fully in my chair then, slowly enough that no one could mistake my calm for confusion. "Then you should not have come to my birthday," I said. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The sentence moved through the room like a cold draft under a closed door. Someone at the far end of the table set down a fork. Helen, my dearest friend, lifted her chin slightly, and for the first time that night I saw anger on a face that was not trying to hide from me. Richard exhaled sharply, as if I had been rude. Imagine that. He had introduced his new life between the salad and the main course, but I was the one making things uncomfortable. "Maggie, there is no need to punish her," he said. Maggie. The nickname landed badly. He had not used it with warmth in months, and now he used it like a leash, something familiar to pull me back into obedience. I looked at him, really looked, and saw not a brave man choosing happiness, but an old man terrified of becoming ordinary. He wanted Lauren to make him feel young. He wanted me to make him feel innocent. He wanted the room to admire his honesty while ignoring his cruelty. Claire leaned toward Evan and whispered something behind her napkin. I did not hear the words, but I saw Evan close his eyes for half a second. He knew. Maybe not everything. Maybe not the details, but he knew enough to look ashamed instead of surprised. That was when the humiliation changed shape. It stopped being only about Richard and Lauren. It became about the circle of silence around them, the quiet cooperation of people who had watched me walk into that room smiling. I had written thank you cards. I had chosen flowers. I had touched up my lipstick in the ladies' room and told myself I was lucky to still have a family table at 65. Lauren lowered her gaze, but Richard reached toward her as if her discomfort mattered more than my dignity. That small movement finished something inside me. Not with a crash. With a click. A lock turning. I pushed my chair back and stood, smoothing the front of my navy dress with both hands. My knees felt unsteady, but my voice did not. "Excuse me," I said. "I need a moment." Richard looked relieved, mistaking my restraint for defeat. Claire looked relieved too. Evan looked as if he wanted to follow me, but had forgotten how to be my son without permission from his wife. I walked past Lauren without brushing against her, past the cake with the silver candle, past the framed harbor view glowing in the last light of evening. In the ladies' room, I stood before the mirror and saw a woman with pearl earrings, careful makeup, and eyes that had finally stopped begging to be chosen. Then the door opened behind me, and Helen walked in quietly, locked it, and said, "Margaret, please tell me you did not come here unprepared." For a moment, I did not answer Helen. I watched her reflection in the mirror instead, the silver in her hair, the sharpness in her eyes, the steady way she held her purse in front of her like a woman who had survived enough disappointments to recognize one before it finished unfolding. Helen Brooks had known me since Evan was in kindergarten. She had sat beside me through school plays, church luncheons, hospital waiting rooms, and the long summer Richard nearly lost the company because he trusted the wrong partner and refused to admit he was drowning. She knew the version of our marriage that did not fit inside Richard's little speech. "I knew something was coming," I said quietly. "I just did not know he would choose tonight." Helen stepped closer. "How much do you know?" I opened my purse and touched the edge of the silver envelope inside, but I did not pull it out yet. It felt too heavy for that bright little restroom with its marble sinks and lavender soap. "Enough," I said. "The hotel charges, the bracelet, the calls he took outside, and Claire asking about the house every time she came over, like she was measuring curtains in her head." Helen's mouth tightened. "That girl has been looking at your home like it was already listed." I almost smiled at that, but it did not reach my eyes. "She asked me last week whether I had considered a retirement community near Columbia. She said it would be easier on everyone." Helen let out a slow breath. "Easier on everyone means easier for them." I looked down at my hands. They were not trembling anymore. That surprised me. 5 minutes earlier, at the table, I had felt as if the floor had tilted beneath my chair. Now everything felt level, almost painfully clear. Richard wanted to leave me with a public story that made him look brave. Claire wanted me softened by shame, quiet enough to accept whatever arrangement they placed in front of me. Evan wanted the discomfort to pass without asking what it would cost his mother. And Lauren wanted to believe she had been chosen by a generous man, not recruited into an old man's attempt to outrun his reflection. "Daniel Mercer has the papers ready," I said. Helen's eyes narrowed, not in confusion, but in recognition. Daniel had been my attorney for more than 20 years, ever since Richard's business nearly collapsed, and I learned, in one terrible month, that love was not a financial plan. "The trust?" she asked. I nodded. "The house is protected. My retirement accounts are separate. The investment portfolio from my mother's estate was never marital property. Richard knows pieces of it, but not enough. He always found paperwork boring when it protected me." Helen reached out and squeezed my arm, then walked back in there and let him finish embarrassing himself. Before I could answer, the restroom door handle moved. Helen unlocked it, and Claire stepped inside with a face full of gentle concern she had not earned. "Margaret," she said, lowering her voice as though I were fragile. "Richard feels awful that this became emotional. Maybe it would be best if you went home, and tomorrow we can all discuss practical next steps." I dried my hands slowly with a white towel. "Practical next steps?" Claire glanced at Helen, then back at me. "Well, the house is too large for one person. Richard will need room to start over, and you might be happier somewhere smaller. Less upkeep, less pressure. At this point in life, comfort matters more than pride." There it was. Not comfort. Removal. Not concern. Positioning. I looked at Claire's polished smile and finally saw the full shape of the evening. Richard had brought the humiliation. Lauren had brought the proof. But Claire had brought the plan. I folded the towel once, placed it beside the sink, and said, "You are right about one thing, Claire. Practical next steps are exactly what this family needs." Then I opened my purse, touched the silver envelope again, and walked back toward the dining room. I walked back into the dining room with Helen on one side of me and Claire 2 steps behind, still wearing that careful expression people use when they have mistaken control for kindness. The room had not recovered while I was gone. Conversations had started again, but only in small, nervous pieces. A laugh rose from the bar and died too quickly. Someone stirred coffee they were not drinking. The cake still waited near the window, untouched, its silver candle leaning slightly in the soft frosting, as if even it had grown tired of standing upright. Richard was seated now, but he straightened the moment he saw me. Relief passed over his face first, then caution. He had expected red eyes, a trembling mouth, maybe a quiet request to go home. He had expected the version of me who had spent decades smoothing tablecloths over splintered wood. I could almost see him preparing his gentle voice, the one he used when he wanted to make selfishness sound reasonable. Lauren had moved closer to him, though not too close. That interested me. She had the look of a woman beginning to understand that the story she had been told might have missing chapters. Evan stood halfway out of his chair when I approached, but he stopped when Claire touched his sleeve. My son, 38 years old, still waiting for permission to love his own mother in public. I returned to my seat and placed my purse on the table in front of me. Not on the floor. Not beside my chair. In front of me. Richard noticed. So did Claire. Maggie, he began, softer now. This evening got away from me. I looked at him without answering. He swallowed. I should have handled the announcement privately. I admit that. But the truth is, this has been coming for a long time. There it was again, the language of inevitability. As if betrayal were weather. As if humiliation were something that simply rolled in from the Atlantic and soaked everyone equally. I want this to be dignified, he continued. I will make sure you are comfortable. You will not have to worry about anything. Claire leaned forward at exactly the right moment, like a well-trained echo. That is all anyone wants, Margaret. For you to be comfortable. I glanced at her. Comfortable where? Her smile faltered for less than a second. Well, that is something to discuss. A condo, maybe. Or one of those lovely senior communities outside Charleston. Somewhere peaceful. Outside. Charleston. Away from the house. Away from the water. Away from the rooms where I had raised my son and buried my parents in memory and saved Richard from every disaster he later called success. Richard nodded, encouraged by her. The house would be too much for you alone. You never liked dealing with repairs, and the taxes are not small. I think it makes sense for me to stay there for now, while we sort things out. For now. A small phrase with a large appetite. Helen made a quiet sound beside me, but I lifted one hand slightly, asking her to let him continue. When people reveal themselves, it is rude to interrupt. Richard mistook my silence for agreement. I know this is painful, he said, looking briefly around the table, gathering sympathy like loose change. But I am not abandoning you. I am offering a fair path forward. I opened my purse and took out the silver envelope. The paper made a soft sound against the linen tablecloth. Small. Clean. Final. Richard looked at it, then at me. What is that? He asked. I smoothed the flap with my thumb. Something practical, I said. Claire went still. Evan whispered, Mom, but I did not look at him. Not yet. I looked at Richard, the man who had spent the evening speaking as if my life were a room he could clear out for someone new. Then I slid the envelope across the table, stopping it just before his plate. Before you decide where I should live, I said, you should probably understand what still belongs to me. Richard stared at the envelope as if I had placed something alive between us. For a man who had spent the evening speaking in careful, generous phrases, he suddenly had no words ready. He picked it up slowly, using 2 fingers, and pulled out the first page. I watched his eyes move over Daniel Mercer's letterhead, then down to the legal language he had always hated reading because it required patience and consequences. The color changed in his face before he reached the second paragraph. Claire saw it too. Her hand moved toward her necklace, touching the small gold charm at her throat. Lauren leaned closer, not affectionately this time, but curiously, as if she had just heard a strange noise in a house she thought was empty. What is this? Richard asked, but his voice had lost its polish. It is a summary, I said. Daniel thought shorter words might help. Helen coughed once into her napkin. Across the table, Evan lowered himself back into his chair. Richard flipped to the next page, faster now. This says the house is in a separate trust. It is. That is not possible. I folded my hands in my lap. It became possible 22 years ago, after you borrowed against the company line of credit without telling me, missed payroll, and nearly cost 12 men their jobs 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. His jaw tightened. A few people at the table looked down, embarrassed not for me, but because truth spoken calmly is harder to ignore than truth shouted across a room. You agreed to put the house into a protected trust so no future business mistake could take it from our family, I continued. You signed it. Daniel notarized it. Helen witnessed it because you were too proud to ask anyone from your office. Helen lifted her glass slightly, not in celebration, only confirmation. Richard looked at her with a flash of irritation, then back at the papers. The investment accounts, he said. My mother's inheritance, I replied. Separate property. You remember my mother, do you not? The woman who told me never to confuse being loyal with being unprotected. Claire's face had gone very still. That was the moment I knew she had been counting rooms in her mind, imagining Evan inheriting a waterfront house she had never earned. "Margaret," she said carefully, "no one is trying to take anything from you." I turned to her. "Then why were you already moving me out before I had even finished my birthday dinner?" Her mouth opened, but no answer came. Richard pushed the papers down, trying to recover the room. "This is unnecessary. We can handle this privately." "You chose public," I said. The words were quiet, but they landed. "You chose a restaurant full of people who know me. You chose my birthday cake sitting 12 feet away. You chose to introduce Lauren before you had given your wife the courtesy of a private conversation. So now I will choose just as clearly." I stood. Again, this time my legs did not tremble. "You said you wanted a younger woman. That is your choice. But you announced it at the table I paid for, in front of the family I kept together, after letting everyone believe I was too old to understand what was happening around me. So let me make my choice in the same room." I looked at Richard, then at Lauren, then at Claire, and finally at Evan, whose eyes were wet but silent. "You may have your new beginning, Richard, but not my home, not my savings, not my name used to make your selfishness sound noble, and certainly not my silence." No one moved. Even the waiter had stopped near the doorway with a coffee pot in his hand. Richard opened his mouth once, then closed it. For the first time that evening, he looked exactly his age. For several seconds, Richard simply stared at me, the envelope open beneath his hands, the papers spread beside his untouched dinner plate. His mouth worked once, then stopped, as if every sentence he had rehearsed depended on me being smaller than I was. Lauren was the first to move. She took one step back from his chair, not dramatic, not angry, just enough to separate herself from the man who had promised her a future built on rooms he did not own and money he did not control. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She had believed his version because it was flattering to believe a man was risking everything for her. Now she was learning he had risked mostly my dignity and expected me to supply the rest. "Richard," she said softly, "you told me the house was yours." The room heard it. Claire heard it too, and something sharp passed across her face. Not grief. Calculation interrupted. Richard turned toward Lauren with panic dressed as irritation. "This is not the time." I looked at Lauren and said, "No, it is exactly the time." That seems to be the theme of the evening. A few guests shifted in their seats. One of Richard's golf friends, Martin Cole, took off his glasses and folded them carefully, the way people do when they no longer want to watch but cannot look away. Helen stood beside me, quiet and solid. "Margaret is not exaggerating," she said. "I witnessed the trust documents. I also watched her keep Richard's company alive while he told everyone he was handling it." Richard's face hardened. "Helen, stay out of this." "I stayed out of it for 22 years, she replied. "That was long enough." Evan finally stood. His chair scraped louder than Lauren's had. "Mom," he said, and the word came out broken, but I did not let it soften me too quickly. A mother can hear pain in her child's voice and still remember the silence that came before it. I turned to him. "Did you know before tonight?" Claire immediately said, "Evan did not know everything." I kept my eyes on my son. I asked Evan. He looked at his wife, then at his father, then finally at me. His face had the pale, ashamed look of a boy caught hiding a report card, except he was not a boy anymore. "Dad said he was going to tell you soon," he whispered. "And you believe that was enough?" He swallowed. I did not know he would do it like this. There it was. Not innocence. Not surprise. Just a softer version of betrayal. I nodded once, because if I spoke too quickly, the old mother in me might try to rescue him from the discomfort he had earned. Claire reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. That was the first honest thing he had done all evening. Richard stood abruptly, gathering the papers as if putting them back into the envelope could put me back into place. "This has become embarrassing," he said. I looked at the cake, the candle, the white roses, the guests holding their breath. "Yes," I said, "but not for me." Lauren picked up her purse. She did not say goodbye to Richard. She did not say anything to me either, though at the doorway she paused for 1 second, her eyes falling to the bracelet on her wrist. Then she took it off, placed it on the hostess stand, and walked out into the Charleston night. Claire watched her leave with a look of pure alarm, because Lauren was not the only one whose plan had just changed. Richard stared after her, and in that moment, stripped of his speech, his audience, and his imagined fortune, he looked less like a man beginning again and more like a man discovering what he had thrown away before checking whether it could be replaced. I did not stay for the cake. That may sound small, but for a woman like me, it was not. I had spent my whole adult life staying until the dishes were cleared, until the last guest had a ride home, until every uncomfortable silence had been covered with coffee and kindness. That night, I picked up my purse, touched Helen's arm, and walked away while the silver candle still leaned in untouched frosting. Richard called my name once. Not Margaret, not even Maggie. Just a strained sound from a man who had realized too late that the room was no longer listening to him the way it had before. I did not turn around. Outside, the Charleston air was warm and damp, carrying the smell of salt water and jasmine from the planters near the restaurant door. Helen followed me to the curb and stood beside me without speaking. That was why I loved her. She knew there are moments when comfort should not be poured over pain too quickly. Some pain needs air. Some pain needs silence. When the valet brought my car, I took the keys myself. Richard had driven us there, but I drove home alone. I moved slowly through the old streets, past gas lanterns and white porches, past couples walking hand in hand after dinner, past windows glowing with ordinary lives. My hands were steady on the wheel. That surprised me more than anything. I expected to cry. I expected to shake. Instead, I felt as if I had stepped out of a room where the air had been thin for years and was finally breathing enough to notice. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. Our house. My house. The porch light came on automatically, and for a second I remembered Richard installing that motion sensor after I tripped on the front step one rainy evening. I remembered thinking it was love. Maybe it had been, once. That is the hardest part about betrayal. It does not erase the good years. It only teaches you that good years do not give someone permission to humiliate you at the end of them. I went upstairs, removed my pearl earrings, and placed them in the small blue dish on my dresser. Then I took off my wedding ring. I did not throw it. I did not make a speech. To an empty room. I simply laid it inside the velvet box where my mother had kept her brooches and closed the lid. The next morning, sunlight filled the kitchen the same way it always had, touching the counters, the coffee maker, the row of white mugs Richard never noticed unless one was missing. I made coffee for one. At 8 o'clock, I called Daniel Mercer and told him to file everything. At 9:15, I called a locksmith. At 10, Evan came by and stood on the porch with red eyes, holding flowers from a grocery store. I opened the door but did not invite him in. Not yet. He said he was sorry. I believed that he was. I also believed sorry was a beginning, not a repair. Claire waited in the car, staring straight ahead. I looked at my son and said, "When you are ready to be honest without asking your wife or your father how much truth is convenient, you may come back." He nodded, and for once, he did not argue. By noon, the locks were changed. By evening, Helen and I were sitting on the back porch with iced tea, watching the marsh grass move in the breeze. My phone kept lighting up with Richard's name. I turned it face down. For 41 years, I had been afraid of losing my marriage. On my 65th birthday, I finally understood that the real loss had happened slowly, every time I made myself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. That night, I did not feel young. I felt something better. I felt present. I felt whole. And for the first time in years, the silence in my house belonged entirely to me.